It's Friday, October 10th, 2025, and it's time for another reading update. I'm Jim. This is Great Books, Big Ideas, and today I'm going to talk about two books I finished by Northrop, Frye, and Albert Camus, plus a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm actively reading. Stay tuned. Okay, so let's start with the first book I finished. This was back in on the 5th of October, Words with Power, being a second study of the Bible and literature by Northrop Frye. The first book Frye wrote is called The Great Code. And I recently got that at the local used bookshop. I don't have it right here in the room with me, but that's called The Great Code, and I'm actively reading that one, by the way. But let's just focus on this one, Words with Power. And here is what the blurb says on the back. In discussing the poetic images and eternal themes found throughout the Bible, Northrop Frye shows how the simple elements of myth have over the centuries given our literature its structure and power. Frye tells how the Bible, with its special prophetic mode of verbal expression, resonates through the secular literary tradition, from Chaucer and Shakespeare to Shelley, Blake, and T.S. Eliot, skillfully steering his argument between the anti-literary prejudices of many religious scholars and the anti-religious prejudices of many modern literary critics. Frye considers four key poetic images found in the Bible: the mountain, the garden, the cave, and the furnace, and demonstrates how the mythic elements of the Holy Book can shed light on the poetic unity of widely different works. With a winning combination of authority, erudition, and wit, Northrop Frye succeeds in mapping out the complex landscape of the imagination. Nice, succinct coverage of what the book's all about. So I found this book to be, well, let me point out a quirk of the title. This is the Bible and literature. Words with Power being a second study of the Bible and literature. It's not reading the Bible as literature. It's easy to make that assumption, but that would be a false assumption. He thinks of the Bible as something not quite literature, although it has many literary aspects to it. And you can read it in a literary way, but it doesn't fully capture what the Bible does. But the Bible definitely informs imaginative literature, and a lot of the book is discussing that relationship. I thought really probably the last half of the book or last third of the book was maybe my favorite part of it, where he did get into those different you might call them archetypes: the mountain, the garden, the cave, and the furnace, where he really got into talking about the Bible and a little bit more in depth. That was interesting to me. The first part of the book, I'd say the first third to half of the book, was heavy doses of literary theory, where he was going back over his monumental work of literary theory. What's the name of it? Couldn't think of it there. Anatomy of Criticism, 4 essays. I think it came out around 1957. That's one of his most famous books, and it's a real landmark in literary criticism. It seemed like he was like retreading that here and maybe revising, updating it a little bit. Those sections in this book would make a lot more sense if you've read Anatomy of Criticism. And I kept waiting for him to dive a little bit more deeply into the Bible stuff, but there was such a preamble with those early chapters on like the theory stuff. Well, he was laying out a roadmap to understand the rest of what comes in the book, but it just took a little bit too long to get there, in my opinion. I believe this was one of his last books. I'm not quite certain of that, but it came pretty late in his career. And the other thing I noticed, or thought I detected, this was an impression I got, was the coherence, moving from paragraph to paragraph and even sentences within paragraph, seemed to break down sometimes. Like I wasn't quite following the thread. Now, he tends to be a difficult author or critic, but all the other Northrop Frye books I have read, like tend to be more lucid than this one. I mean, his book on William Blake was tough, Fearful Symmetry, because Blake is tough. But even that book I could follow pretty well. This one, it just seemed to hop around. It was kind of stuttering a little bit, like there were gaps. And I found that personally a little bit difficult to read, like harder than I expected, especially for not so long of a book. But so it took me longer to get through this than I thought it would. But all that being said, it was a worthwhile read. I'm going to keep it for a while too, I think. And I want to compare it to The Great Code, which I was really happy to find. And I will say that The Great Code is a lot more lucid. I think that's probably a much stronger book than this. But this is kind of an update of that book. So it's almost like I should read this after I read The Great Code, or should have read this after I read The Great Code, but whatever, I'm doing it backwards. But anyway, the Bible and literature, Northrop Frye has a lot to say about that. And, you know, he's a great critic talking about myth, archetype. He's very sensitive to like literary tropes, symbolism, patterns, the anatomy of literature, the anatomy of criticism. Like this is his wheelhouse. This is what he's good at. So I was glad to get through it, and yeah, good pickup. Found it at a library sale, and I'm glad I read it. I got a lot out of it. The other book I read, this was a little free library find, and it's called Albert Camus, Caligula and Three Other Plays. And this is falling apart. I don't think it's even in the kind of condition where I'm going to be able to give it away. I might just have to recycle it. I really like the cover. I might save the cover design. But in any case, this is what this book is about. Well, it's four plays, and there's a preface by Albert Camus in there. He wrote this preface in December 1957. He didn't have too much longer to live. He died in a car accident, I think in 1960, at a pretty young age. So anyway, the four plays are Caligula, The Misunderstanding, State of Siege, and The Just Assassins. And this is translated from the French by Stuart Gilbert, published by Vintage Books. And I have to say, an enjoyable read. I didn't even realize that Camus had written dramas. I thought he was just an essay guy. But I don't know if he wrote more plays than this or not, but these are four plays that he did write, and they were all quite readable. I don't know if all these plays were equally stageable, but apparently I think they all did get productions. Some of them I thought were, dramatically speaking, probably more friendly to the stage than others. The other ones read more like closet dramas. But really briefly, what I remember from these is Caligula was about the historical Roman Emperor Caligula. And Camus had read Suetonius's 12 Caesars and got inspired to write a play about Caligula. And this harmonizes well with the fact that I'd recently read the 12 Caesars myself several months ago. So it's good timing there. And it's about that tyrant, Caligula, the crazy man, and all the ridiculous stuff that he does. The Misunderstanding was a dark play. Like it was sort of almost, I would almost call it theater of the absurd. Just in terms of the premise. So it's like this mother and her daughter, and they run this inn in like a French rural town, and they have this thing that they do where if somebody stays in their inn and they realize that they don't really have many ties or anything, they kill this person and steal his money and like dump him in the river. And I'm not sure how often they did this. But anyway, the setup of the play is that their long-lost son, who left, when he was little, has come back, and he wants to reunite with his sister and his mother, and he's under an assumed name, so he's staying at the inn. And I think it's his fiance or his wife, she doesn't really want him to do this, but he has this sort of plan that he doesn't want to tell them right away who he really is, and he's going to divulge it. And then, so, the wife slash fiance, she has to kind of stay in another place while he's doing this. And lo and behold, they cook up this plan to kill him. And yeah, I'll just leave it there. It's pretty dark, but all these are existential or existentialist dramas. But that was like a weird premise, and it was disturbing to read. In their way, all these plays were somewhat disturbing. Now, the third play was State of Siege. That was, I would almost call that like an allegorical drama. So it's about like this Spanish town where, it's kind of a traditional culture and people doing their thing at the marketplace, and there's lots of characters. This is one that I thought might be difficult to stage because there's like so much going on, so much stage business. But anyway, a plague invades the city, and the plague is a character named the plague, and there's another character called Nada, and some of these characters, and there's a secretary and so on and so forth, and it has some absurdist or irrational qualities to it that take it out of the realm of realistic drama. So, to have a character named the plague, but the plague doesn't really symbolize the plague so much as the plague symbolizes a tyrannical, authoritarian government or ruler. And that seems to be what Camus is gunning for here, like what this kind of government does to the population, or this kind of authoritarian government is like a plague. But you can kind of see, you can sort of read it both ways, like how a plague can serve as an authoritarian government, or an authoritarian government sort of like can stand in as a plague. So very, very interesting premise, and to follow how he works through that was also interesting. The last play really was about terrorists. So it's based on historical assassination or assassination attempt on like a Grand Duke in Russia. So you have like these revolutionaries, like a cell, and they've hatched together this plan, and it's sort of about a plan to like bomb the Grand Duke, and they've been planning it for months, and it's all very secretive. And then at the point where they're about to do it, some of the characters have a real hard time with the ethics of committing this terrorism. And again, you work through the drama of all that, and there's lots of conflicts between the characters and their attitudes. And so all of these were kind of heavy-duty topics, but that it's written in a pretty lucid way. I mean, Camus is a good writer. If you like Camus' fictions, I can't imagine you wouldn't like these dramas. Like, it's sort of the same thing. And I might want to quote a few passages from his preface, just to show you like how he reflected on his plays. There's maybe a couple things worth quoting here. Okay, here's Camus talking about his character Caligula. Caligula, a relatively attractive prince up to then, becomes aware on the death of Drusilla, his sister and mistress, that this world is not satisfactory. Thenceforth, obsessed with the impossible and poisoned with scorn and horror, he tries through murder and the systematic perversion of all values to practice a liberty that he will eventually discover not to be the right one. He challenges friendship and love, common human solidarity, good and evil. He takes those about him at their word and forces them to be logical. He levels everything around him by the strength of his rejection and the destructive fury to which his passion for life leads him. But if his truth is to rebel against fate, his error lies in negating what binds him to mankind. One cannot destroy everything without destroying oneself. This is why Caligula depopulates the world around him and, faithful to his logic, does what is necessary to arm against him those who will eventually kill him. Caligula is the story of a superior suicide. It is the story of the most human and most tragic of errors. Unfaithful to mankind through fidelity to himself, Caligula accepts death because he has understood that no one can save himself all alone and that one cannot be free at the expense of others. You can hear the existentialism that's informing this character and the story. And I have to admit that as I was reading his portrayal of Caligula, I couldn't help but think of other active authoritarian style leaders that are much closer to our contemporary moment. Let's see what he has to say about the misunderstanding. He says, this is the first paragraph. The misunderstanding was written in 1943 in occupied France. I was then living quite reluctantly in the mountains of central France. That historical and geographical situation would be enough to explain the sort of claustrophobia from which I suffered then, and which is reflected in that play. It is true that its atmosphere is suffocating, but we were all short of breath at that time. Nonetheless, the play's gloominess bothers me as much as it bothered the public. To encourage the reader to approach the play, I shall suggest 1, granting that the play's morality is not altogether negative, and 2, looking upon the misunderstanding as an attempt to create a modern tragedy. About the state of siege, he said, truly few plays have ever enjoyed such a unanimous slashing. So when this went up, everybody hated it. I actually kind of liked State of Siege, but he says, that is the more deplorable, since I've never given up thinking that State of Siege, with all its shortcomings, is of all my writings the one that most resembles me. Still, the reader is quite free to decide that however faithful it may be, he doesn't like that image. But he says, here's what you should know about the play. 1, State of Siege is in no sense an adaptation of my novel, The Plague. To be sure, I gave that symbolic name to one of my characters, but since he is a dictator, that appellation is correct. 2, State of Siege is not a play of classical conception. It might better be compared with what were called moralité in the French Middle Ages and in Spain, auto sacramentales, a sort of allegorical drama, which staged subjects known to the whole audience in advance. And it's definitely allegorical. You can see that all written all over it. The Just Assassins was well received. He says he wants to clear up some misunderstandings about this play. He says, 1, the events recounted in the Just Assassins are historical, even a surprising interview between the Grand Duchess and her husband's murderer. One must therefore judge merely the extent to which I managed to give plausibility to what was true. 2, the form of the play must not mislead the reader. I tried to achieve dramatic tension through classical means, that is, the opposition of characters who are equal in strength and reason. But it would be wrong to conclude that everything balances out, and that in regard to the problem raised here, I recommend doing nothing. My admiration for my heroes is complete. I merely wanted to show that action itself had limits. There is no good and just action, but what recognizes those limits, and if it must go beyond them, at least accepts death. Our world of today seems loathsome to us for the very reason that it is made by men who grant themselves the right to go beyond those limits, and first of all, to kill others without dying themselves. Thus it is that today, justice serves as an alibi throughout the world for the assassins of all justice. So yeah, that's Albert Camus, Caligula in 3 plays. Recommend it, especially if you're into the writing of Camus. And that is what I've completed since the last reading update. Now, I'm also actively reading a bunch of other stuff. I mentioned The Great Code by Northrop Frye. That's going along really well. I'm making very good progress in The Cider House Rules by John Irving. funny thing happened to me when I was reading this one morning. Is I was reading a good chunk of it here in the middle of the book, and then I started to get deja vu. I'm like, wait, have I read this before? What's going on? And after some detective work, I realized they doubled one of the signatures in here. So there's like a 32-page segment of the book that's just comes right after that segment. So there's two of them. I don't know what happened when the book got made, but it was very confusing at the time. I thought I was going out of my mind, but I wasn't. It was just a mistake. No pages are missing to my knowledge. It's just doubled, like a 32-page signature, I think we call it in publishing, that got inserted. But yeah, it's I really like this book so far. I'll have more to say about it when I'm done, but I'm very much into the characters, and it's a slow burn, but it's a good one. I also started reading a new book. Well, it's not new to my shelves. I've had it for a few years, but it's one of these Barnes & Noble classics, Hans Christian Andersen, classic fairy tales. I was just in the mood to read some fairy tales. I pulled it off the shelf, and I've read about 3 or 4 stories in here so far. So that's it's a very nicely illustrated volume. I really like the look and feel of the book. And I'll show this more like once I've made more progress in it or I finished it. Also, since I've been, what else is going? Oh yeah, so I've got, I've been reading City of God by St. Augustine in Great Books of the Western World, and I'm also rereading books 1 through 8 of the Confessions by St. Augustine, in the same volume, and that is for my Great Books reading plan year 1. That's the next reading that's up. So I have to say, I'm really sort of into St. Augustine right now. Like City of God, I did not finish the first time I attempted it. It was a modern library edition. I think I got about halfway through with it, and then I kind of gave up in exasperation. I have a completely different experience with that book so far. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully that momentum keeps up, but like I'm really enjoying it. And I always did like the Confessions, so it's nice to be getting back into that one. And another new book I've picked up off the shelf is a coffee table book. This is called The Great Cities, Jerusalem. So this is a combination of photographs and text. And I'll do a walkthrough of this once I finish it, but this is part of the Time Life series. And I guess I picked this off the shelf because I've been reading some religious themed stuff lately. So I read the book of Matthew and the book of Acts, did a video on that for the year 1 reading plan. I've been reading The Great Code. I read the other Northrop Frye book I just talked about, Words and Power, reading St. Augustine, City of God, and Confessions. So like, the wheels are turning. I'm like, okay, I want to know more about Jerusalem. And obviously we've had this book probably since the early 90s, possibly even the late 80s. And I just never even read it. I looked at the pictures, but I never read it. So I thought, well, let's give the text a try. And so far, it's really good history. It's written by Colin Thubrand and the editors of Time Life Books, and the photographs by J. Maisel. And this was published in the mid-1970s. And the one little fascinating tidbit about our author, Colin Thubrand, he was born in London in 1939, and he is or was a descendant of the first English poet laureate, John Dryden. This is John Dryden's descendant wrote this book about one of the world's great cities, Jerusalem. And it's well written, I have to say. Here's like I've been referring to this map a lot because he talks about all these place names and the gates and the different parts, and it's a real deep dive into Jerusalem and the history and the mashup of religions and cultures. Yeah, I'm glad I finally, sometimes a book's been waiting for you and it's just been there for years and you never take it off the shelf. And lately I've been doing more of that, and it's as if I live in a bookstore, so I might as well enjoy that fact. And it's like you don't even remember quite when you got it, but there it is. It's like your own used bookstore. And it's like, oh, this is a cool book. I think I'll buy it. Oh, I don't have to buy it. I already have it. Let me just read it. So that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun visually. It's a lot of fun narratively. It's good history of that very important city. So anyway, that is lots of other stuff I'm reading, but those are the highlights. What have you all been up to this week or in the last couple of weeks? What have you finished? If you got comments on any of these books I talked about, feel free to weigh in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, hope you like, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Hope everyone's doing well. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.